네, 안녕하십니까. 저는 기본소득 학교 네트워크의 안효상입니다. 오늘 행사를 어쨌든 시작하는 말을 제가 간단하게 열고 곧바로 발표와 그다음에 토론하도록 하겠습니다. 어쨌든 다비드 카사사스가 오셔서 할 수 없이 그냥 영어로 잠깐 인사말을 하는 것으로 하고 시작하도록 하겠습니다. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Hyosang, board member of Basic Income Korean Network. This afternoon, we are going to have a workshop on the title of Democracy and Basic Income. It's significantly important to discuss the relationship between the democracy and basic income in the time when we see a complex theme in which those who have not their voices have sought their shares, while the establishment is not able to respond to them. It's my honor to introduce two speakers, David Casassas and Geum, who are leading members in their own networks, as well as significant theoretical contributors to the basic income movement across the world. David teaches social theory and politics at University of Barcelona. He is also vice president of Spanish network, Red Renta Basica, and also a member of International Radical Journal, Sin Permiso, in English without permission. He visited Seoul in 2016 as a keynote speaker at BN Congress, as you know, and this time he visits as a keynote speaker at an organizers workshop in the World Congress of Constitutional Law that was held yesterday. Geum is director of Institute for Political and Economic Alternatives and a board member of Basic Income Korean Network, as you know. Above all, he proposed basic income policies as one of his electoral promises as early as 2007, when he ran for the presidential election holding socialist ticket. His main area is political philosophy, but he tries to catch up to current changes of capitalist system in order to find possibilities of post-capitalism in which basic income would be a kind of anchor. Finally, before closing my opening, I'd like to thank a few people who helped organize the workshop. Somi, who takes photographs, Somi Young, who works for the Institute for Political and Economic Alternatives and did some hard bush jobs, especially design online poster for the workshop, and that Diana as well. Somi Park, Deputy Secretary General Basic Income Korean Network, did general affairs as usual. David even said she is supporting Basic Income Korean Network on her two shoulders. Oh. Institute for Political Economy and Economic Alternatives, that is a group member of our network, co-organized the workshop. I'd like to thank Director Geum and Vice Director Geum. Finally, the workshop will be conducted in two languages, in Korean as well as in English. His Jung is here to help us to communicate. One more thing, we have dinner after the workshop. After the workshop, I inform you of it. In time, we get to start the main body of the workshop. First speaker is David, and his subject is why a democratic social and economic right requires a basic income. David, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hyosang. And I would like to thank also the rest of people here for coming, and the Basic Income Korean Network for inviting this, for organizing this and inviting me to take part of this workshop. When you travel for academic reasons, like yesterday's workshop, sometimes you find interesting things, but sometimes in academia things are very much into the blackboard or the whiteboard and very general ideas. And sometimes you need to land into concrete live and with groups of people who really are engaged in social and political movements. So for me, taking part of this seminar, this workshop, okay. Taking part of this workshop for me it was a great opportunity to give more sense to my trip to Korea. So this is why I'm so thankful to Hyo-sang, but also to the rest of you. We will discuss some things as well with Min. I think there is a certain disagreement in some aspects, but I think there's an underlying strong agreement and strong and shared concerns. And we will see whether this is the case or not. I've been told that I have to talk for 20 minutes, so I will start immediately, not to lose time. You have the outline of what I will be saying, so you will be able to follow my steps easily. And if there's any doubt or whatever, we can discuss it later or when you wish. Well, I wanted to start by saying that democracy, and beyond that, economic democracy, more concretely, economic democracy, is not an empty motto, an empty label. Economic democracy has to do with social power, with the capacity of doing things. Which things? Well, mainly four things to simplify. First, having the real capacity to enter into social relations, into work relations, for instance, with people, with other people, relations that you really wish for your life. So, first of all, the capacity to enter and perform activities, paid work or unpaid work, and other activities that you really wish for your life. Secondly, once you are in this relationship, you have to have the capacity to co-determine that relationship. So in some way, you have to have the possibility of performing an act of voice, of saying what you like and what you don't like and what you would like to change within this relationship. Otherwise, there are no democratic relations within that sphere. Thirdly, there's a third capacity which is very important, which is the capacity to exit. If that relationship degrades and you are treated in a way that you don't deserve, you don't like, you don't want, you have to have the capacity to exit this relationship. And many people cannot exit nowadays wage-earning labor, for instance, because they are dispossessed. And fourth, when you exit, in case you want to exit, when you exit, you have to have the capacity to restart your life in decent ways. And so you have to have the right, if you want to put it that way, to second, third, and subsequent opportunities to reshape your productive, reproductive, etc. Life. So, in some way, my approach to economic democracy has to do with a very general idea. I think a Republican idea of the capacity to do and undo social relations of your own. Sorry. Harrington used to use this term, a life of your own, relationships or your own. Well, relationships, work relationships, productive relations are of your own if you really can do them and undo them well, with real power to do so. Well, as you know, I come from a Republican perspective, and this is what I've been working on for a long time. And the Republican tradition states that for these social and economic relations to be democratic, you need material conditions, material and symbolic conditions. But today we focus on material conditions. If you want to, in the debate, we can talk about symbolic conditions. And this you can find all along the Republican tradition, from the classics, from the Greeks, to nowadays. In Greece and Rome, it was very clear that only proprietors, only those who controlled resources, could be free. That was assumed in philosophy. even if you did a democratic revolution, which was the case with Pericles and Aspasia in the 5th century before Christ, you have to think on ways to give resources to poor people for them to be really free agents, really free actors, really free political actors. Hence, the Misthun. Misthun was a payment, sort of a basic income, for poor people who wanted, it was not exactly basic income, but for poor people who wanted to enter into the agora to discuss public affairs. Okay, to do it in conditions of freedom, not of subservience, they needed material resources. Well, you can find that, now we jump into the Renaissance, Italy, what later would be Italy. And there as well you find this idea that we should be very careful about great accumulation of private economic power, because this is very much linked to dispossession. If there are vast accumulation of economic power, it very likely means that many people are dispossessed, and if people are dispossessed, it means they are unfree, they are not free. So the same Republican idea. If you go to the 17th century, to the English Revolution, if you go to the 18th century, to the North American or to the French Revolution, you find the same. We, the people, in order to be free, need resources. Which resources? Basic income? No, they didn't talk about basic income at that time, well, with the exception of Tom Paine. But they talk mainly about land reform. We can only be free if we do an agrarian reform that gives land to everyone. So there's always a link between freedom and the control of material resources. If we go further and we go to the 19th century and you look at the socialist tradition, you start to see things that you realize that they are not new. You start to see, for instance, that Marx talks about the importance of having a Republican Association of Free Producers. A Republican Association of Free Producers. Of course, when he's thinking again about the idea of we free, for instance, entering into the productive field in order to set up productive relations of our own. And we will be able to do that insofar as we are independent actors. If we are not independent actors, Marx says, not Aristotle, Marx, Aristotle did the same, said the same, but Marx says this in the 19th century, we will have to live asking day after day the permission of others, of Geum, who's a very powerful man, asking Geum, please, let us live. Asking the permission to live. No, you are here. You are the bad guy. But only for the example. You're a very nice guy. But this is only for the example. So Marx said, if we depend on Geum, we will have to ask for his permission to live day after day. So if you can see, Marx's analysis is pure Republican analysis. When he talks about the collective control over the means of production, he's talking about the fact that we should be able to co-determine the relationships that take place within the productive field. He's not inventing nothing new in this way. So the background of all this is all this Republican approach, which many of you know. I know that the Basic Income Korean Network has been discussing Republican ideas for ages. That has to do, this Republican background, with the idea that freedom and democracy and economic democracy require the presence of relevant doses of resources. Why? Because resources confer bargaining power. That's the central issue of my perspective. The importance of bargaining power that should be distributed among all individuals and groups. These bargaining powers helps us to pass what Philippe Petit calls the eyeball test, the test of the gaze. Can I look at Geum's eyes without having to turn the head down because I depend on Geum? Or I depend on Geum and I am a mere supplicant, as Guy Standing said, says, and I beg Hyo-san for a job, or I beg Hyo-san for a subsidy, or that's the crucial point, and this crucial point has to do with bargaining power. But we can see that in other terms. Economic democracy can be linked also to the idea of putting and governing resources in common. And here is where I think there's an intersection with what Min will explain later. The idea of putting and governing resources in common. And this idea forces us to dwell for a moment in the idea of property as a fiduciary relationship. In constitutional law, which is what yesterday we were discussing, this is called the social function of property. When we talk about property as a fiduciary idea, we talk about fiducia. Fiducia in Latin meant trust. So we are trusting and trusting Hyo-san, who is the proprietor, with the property, but if this is a fiduciary relationship, he can grow rich, he can make a lot of money, but there are some conditions that we can impose on him. We, the people, impose some conditions on Hyo-san. He cannot do whatever he wants with his property. That property has to do with common resources. He has accessed these resources, okay, let's assume that's okay, but we decide that we have to control what he can do with those resources. If we go back again to past ideas, we can see John Locke, which is who is an author that many people link to the liberal idea, but he had ideas that are not compatible with capitalism, with real existing capitalism. Locke said Hyo-san can appropriate privately resources, but with three conditions. First condition, Hyo-san must leave as much and as good for others. So he cannot appropriate everything and leave us dispossessed. That's important, and this is incompatible with capitalism. Second idea, Hyo-san, just a moment, Hyo-san, that's the third one. Yeah, the second idea is that Hyo-san can make money, he can grow rich, but he must be aware of what the social needs are. So one of these functions that his property has is to cover the needs of everyone, primarily. And after that, if he can and wishes and is able to grow rich, perfect, but just afterwards. And third one, the non-spoiling clause. He cannot spoil the resources. And there are future generations to come, and these generations have to access to the resources as well. So he can't do whatever he wants with resources. But you can find that in this is very important in the shaping of the modern world. You can find that in 18th century revolutionaries. You can find that in early 20th century Mexican revolutionaries. You have a quote. No, you don't have a quote, but it doesn't matter. There's an article of Mexican Constitution, Article 27, who states the same Lockean idea. You can find that in the 20s in Europe, in the Weimar Republic, in Germany and in Austria, and you can find that also in post-World War II constitutions in Europe. And the Spanish case, it comes later. The constitution comes in 1978, but it states this, exactly this. The Article 128 of our constitution says, this is not applied, but they say, the entire wealth of the country in its different forms, irrespective of ownership, shall be subordinated to the general interest. Public initiative in economic activity is recognized. Essential resources or services may be reserved by law to the public sector, especially in the case of monopolies. Likewise, state intervention in companies may be imposed when the public interest so demands. But this is not only an issue of European people. I know the history of Korea is very complex, but if you go to the constitution of 1948 with amendments through 1987, you can find that even also in the Korean constitution there's an idea, there's an echo of these Lockean provisos when the constitution says, Article 23, sections 2 and 3, the exercise of property rights shall conform to the public welfare. Expropriation, use or restriction of private property from public necessity and compensation, therefore, are governed by who? By Hyo-san? No, by law. So this is what says the Korean constitution. I think you don't apply that very much, as in Spain. We don't apply Article 128, but that's on the constitution. So as you can see, this goes at odds. This is the contrary of what says the liberal notion of property as the absolute, exclusive, and dispossessing right over the resource. Blackstone was a guy of the 18th century who wrote his commentaries on the laws of England of 1753, and he says something that has nothing to do with this republican world. He says, there is nothing which so generally strikes the imagination and engages the affections of mankind as the right to property. And what is the right to property? He says, the right to property is that sole and despotic dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world in total exclusion of the right of any other individual in the universe. So as you can see, this is at odds. This is the opposite of what it's the opposite to the Republican notion of property, which is the only notion of property that is compatible with Republican, with effective freedom for everybody. Okay, there's a very small political and normative background for this idea coming from economic theory. And here I think there will be another intersection with Min. There are authors like Mariana Mazzucato or Yanis Varoufakis, the former Minister of Economy of Greece, who, for a very brief period, economists who say that wealth is a social product, that wealth is essentially collective, that wealth is a heritage from the past and from alien efforts. Wealth comes from merit, but very partially. Wealth has very much to do with knowledge flows, the knowledge flows between people and between generations. It has to do with collectively made spaces and devices. It has to do with alien, but at the same time intertwined efforts. This is what ends up being wealth. And of course there is some merit, but wealth has to do with that. Therefore, wealth requires that there is as well wealth distribution. We need to have social distribution, because wealth is not an individual product, but is a social product. So economic justice requires the universalization of the control over wealth, over the use of wealth. Which kind of use do we want to make of this wealth? So this is a necessary condition. The universalization of the right to use wealth and determine how to use wealth is a necessary condition for the universalization of the right to co-determine our individual and collective socioeconomic life. And this is very much in keeping. This has to do with that idea, that Republican idea of property as a fiduciary relationship, or that idea of a social function of property. Since wealth is a common social product, let's all of us, without exclusions, decide who, how, why, and what for, what to do in the end with wealth, with resources. We need to distribute it, and we need to co-determine how to use it. But how to distribute wealth and bargaining power in contemporary societies? Well, you all know very well the idea of basic income, but let me just link it to this discussion. and I'll be fast because I must start to finish. Basic income, because of its unconditionality, gives us the bargaining power to say no to unwanted relationships, not in order to become an isolated atom, but in order to create and recreate other economic environments or other economic relationships. So is a power to say no that enables us to say yes, many yeses to other relations that we would like to have with many people, paid relations, unpaid relations in productive work, care work, etc. that we cannot perform today because we are we depend on Geum-san's wishes. No? So we have a real problem with this man. You know very well the theory of basic income, so I don't want to bother you with that. Just let me add that I don't think that basic income is the solution to this, as I think we share that perspective. I don't think that basic income is the only way to distribute wealth today. If we did that, that would be a neoliberal dystopia. Imagine a world without public services where we had to buy in the market healthcare, education, care, housing, everything. Well, some societies are very close to that, but imagine that was the project, that would be a neoliberal version of basic income, and I don't buy that. I think that basic income has to be part of a wider package of measures. This will give us the idea of basic income as an emancipatory project, not as an atomizing project. I think it is also important to add, and I will finish with basic income, and I will start with the conclusions. It's important to add that even if we have been empowered from below with the basic income and the package of measures, and we have the power to say no to Geum, but we have very powerful economic actors, 15 families maybe, that control the whole country, and I'm thinking in Korea and in Spain as well. In Spain we have the same problem. We talk about 35 main companies in Spain. Well, if these people control the whole economy, well, if Geum and Min and Sue and myself want to make something, I don't know, a cooperative arrangement, but we cannot enter into markets because markets have entry barriers, because there are big proprietors who managed to introduce entry barriers, we have a strong problem. So we need basic income, the package of measures, and also some ways, we can think about that in the debate if you want to control vast accumulations of private economic power as well. We'll see how. I start to finish. In the end, what I'm suggesting here, and this is also something I suggest in a book I've just published in Spanish, and hopefully I will publish it in English soon, so you'll be able to read it, if you want. It's not an obligation. In the end, what we are talking here is the conquest of meaningful work, of meaningful lives. We're talking about here as the basic income as part of this package of measures, enabling us with the capacity to resume that old task of collectively deciding, controlling how to shape property rights, how to shape the economic environment. Where do we want to enter? Can we determine the space we enter? Can we exit that space if it erodes our freedom? Can we restart our lives? So the idea of a meaningful life and of meaningful work, meaningful works, because there are many kinds of work. There's paid work, there's voluntary work. This is voluntary work. There's care work. Can we really decide individually and collectively what to do with whom, at what pace, why, what for? So this bargaining power coming from basic income and the package of measures has to do with the idea of resuming the task of controlling all these things and conquesting acquiring ways, you say to conquest, conquesting ways of performing meaningful work. Within wage earning work or without or outside wage earning work? Well, that's another important point. I think it is important that we basic income advocates problematize wage earning work. Wage earning work is something that we do because we sign a contract under conditions of dispossession. Normally, not always, but very often that's the case. If you sign a contract under conditions of dispossession with Hyo-san, and Hyo-san is not dispossessed, but I am dispossessed, he will be able to shape our relationship, and I won't have the capacity to co-determine what to do, how to do it, when, why, with whom, what for, etc. So, from Aristotle to Marx, and nowadays we know it very, very well as well, Republicans have always said that wage earning work is incompatible with freedom. Even Marx talked about wage slavery, but Aristotle talked about part-time slavery. You're a part-time slave because during your working hours, you do what somebody else tells you to do without you having the right to decide what, how, with whom, why, etc. So, does basic income force us to abandon wage earning work? Not at all. But it enables us to abandon totally or partially wage earning work if we decide to do it. If it occurs that my relationship with my employer, Hyo-san Han, is a bad relationship because he's treating me badly. Or maybe because I want to do something else with Min and Sue because we want to set up a cooperative arrangement. So we are not forced. I'm not saying that people are forced to abandon wage earning work. I'm saying that wage earning work should be another option among other options for us to decide what to do. Especially in this age of, and I finish because I know I'm very late. In this age of, I decided not to read the notes in order to be faster, but without reading, you sometimes go into details, and then I've been slower. So I'm really sorry, but I'm about to finish. But just to say that in this age of automatization, in which wage earning work, labor, is not available for everybody, we can take advantage of this situation in order to try to avoid the extremely alienating work that is sometimes made within wage earning work, and try to decide and really co-decide and really determine ourselves the kind of works we want to perform in many spheres of our lives. Paid work and unpaid work. But in order to make these decisions, we need a safety net. We cannot depend only on labor market. In order to do these decisions, which have to do with entering and exiting many spaces, companies, households. There are people who might want to abandon a household, whatever. We need this position of this bargaining position to do it in a really free way. And last idea. We have very much talked about the proletariat, especially those who come from a Marxian tradition. That's my case. And we've talked also about the importance of having a proletarian consciousness. We are part of a class of those who have to work for others because they have no other option. Good. But are we proud of that? Well, I think we should be proud of being part of a collective endeavor, a collective project, aiming at dissolving the class of the proletariat. Because what is the class of the proletariat? Is that the class of the proletariat is the class of those people who have no other option than performing wage-earning work for Hyo-san. Because these people are dispossessed. If we had sets of resources, including basic income and the package of measures, and if we could control big accumulations of economic power, we wouldn't stop being workers. In fact, a meaningful life is impossible without work, but not with forced wage earning work, not with the kind of work that the proletariat does. Marx himself wanted the proletariat to have consciousness of becoming to this class in order to dissolve the class and create the class, and this is what I'm suggesting today as well, the class of individuals and groups who freely associate to perform freely chosen work, paid work and unpaid work. And I beg your pardon again for my using more time than the time I had, but sometimes one makes mistakes. But I hope it helped a little bit. Thank you very much.
중간중간에 해야 되는 거 아닌가? 토론은 원래?
이거 있어서 다 하는 걸로 봐요.
그런 건가?
일단 토론할 때 혹시 모르는 여쭤보시는 걸 하고요. 이게 어차피 번역문이 있으니까. 뭐 곧바로 국민은
먼저 제가 하기 전에 두 가지 그 인쇄된 페이퍼에 오류가 있어서 지적을 해야 될 것 같고요. 그 카사사스 번역문 1에 보면은 어떤 분이 번역하시는지 모르겠지만 맨 끝에 개념이라 돼 있고 로스트 저서의 구절제로 되어 있거든요. 그게 클라우즈입니다. 그러니까 이게 단서, 제한 조항, 또는 한계 이렇게 번역해야 되고요. 단순한 구절이 아니고 정확하게 얘기하면 not as good as clause 하고 그리고 스폴리지 그 두 개 얘기하는 거고요. 그다음 제가 글을 쓰다가 워낙에 기본소득 액수를 쫀쫀하게 좀 책정하다 보니까 머티리얼 익지스턴스라고 써야 되는데 머티리얼 서브시스턴스라고 썼어요. 그래서 이건 제 마음이 많이 쫄아들어 있었다. 그래서 좀 익지스턴스로 바꿔가지고 이해해 주셨으면 좋겠고요. 일단 제 페이퍼의 요지만을 쭉 간추려서 읽을 텐데 먼저 보신 분들을 위해서 소개 몇 말씀을 좀 드려야 될 것 같아요. 하나는 저는 공화주의 기본소득에 찬성한다는 거고요. 그 이유에 대해서 말씀드리겠습니다. 그 이유는 사실은 이 공적 소유 있잖아요. 그러니까 뭐 퍼블릭 오너십 이건 일정한 분배 방식을 그 안에 필연적으로 내포하고 있지 않습니다. 예를 들어 자본주의 사회 공기업이 국민들한테 n분의 1로 분배하나요? 안 하죠. 그리고 소비에트 사회주의의 전임 및 소유가 개인들에게 n분의 1로 분배했나요? 안 했습니다. 그러니까 어떤 분배 방식과 소유 형태가 뭐 공적 소유라고 해서 반드시 기본소득을 내포하고 있는 관계가 아니다. 이것은 내적 연관성이 없다라는 겁니다. 그래서 약간의 철학이 필요합니다. 거기에 공화주의 정치학에 굉장히 좋은 시사점을 줄 수 있는데 그 이유는 공화주의 정치 철학에서 굉장히 중요한 것은 비의존성, 인디펜던스입니다. 그러니까 시민의 비의존성. 뭐 페티트는 비집의 자유라고 얘기를 하고, 뭐 라벤토스 같은 사람은 물질적 생존이라고 얘기를 하고, 어쨌든 남한테 의존하지 않고 내가 이렇게 결정할 수 있다는 능력이고, 지금 다빗 카사사스는 맨 앞에 민주주의의 경제적 민주주의의 네 가지 조건이라고 얘기했습니다. 저는 다 찬성합니다. 이게 필요합니다. 우리가 결정할 수 있는 자유, 그러니까 신자유주의자들의 자유가 아니라 주어진 선택, 시장적으로 주어진 것 속에서 서로 선택을 할 수 있는 자유가 아니라 내가 실제 거부할 수 있고 나갈 수 있고 또 형성할 수 있는 자유를 우리가 생각한다 그러면은 공화주의 정치가 굉장히 중요하다라는 겁니다. 그럼 이 페이퍼는 뭐 이건 페이퍼니까 굉장히 좁은 의미를 다룬 거고요. 제가 공화주의에 찬성한다라는 입장을 전제를 하고 그 안에서 근데 과연 공화주의의 기본소득론이라는 게 이게 한계가 있는 거 아닌가? 다른 요소가 훨씬 더 강화돼야 되지 않는가를 따진 겁니다. 쭉 훑어보겠습니다. 일단 공화주의자가 아니라도 많은 사람들은 기본소득을 시민권의 원리하고 일치시킵니다. 대표적으로 피츠패트릭이라는 이상 그린 레프트 정도로 볼 수 있을 것 같은데요. 이런 사회복지학자들 보죠. 이제 시민권의 원리가 기본소득과 어떤 무사하다 이렇게 말하는 건 가능한데 기본소득이 시민권의 원리 기초에 있다 이렇게 말할 수는 없다고 저는 봅니다. 왜냐하면은 시민권의 원리에 입각한 건 공공구조도 시민권의 원리에 입각했거든요. 그러니까 그 사이에 어떤 차별성이 없다라는 겁니다. 나쁘게 얘기하면은 이것은 시민권의 원리와 기본소득이 갖고 있는 어떤 유사성을 드러내는 것뿐이지 이 개념적 내적 연관은 없는 얘기다라는 겁니다. 그리고 기본소득이 권리인가가 중요한 게 아니라 이게 왜 무조건적인 권리고 왜 이 무조건성이 어떻게 논증될 수 있는가가 더 중요하다고 봅니다. 그런 의미에서 공화주의 기본소득론을 또 검토할 필요가 있는데요. 공화주의에서 굉장히 중요한 것은 이 시민 자격입니다. 그러니까 뭐 시티즌이 시민됨 또는 뭐 시티즌십 이런 개념들이 이제 중요한 건데 공화주의 시민 개념이 우리가 알고 있는 시민 개념 중에 가장 확장된 시민 개념입니다. 이것은 단순히 정치적 시민권이 아니라 이 카사스가 앞에 쭉 설명했듯이 상당히 물질적인 영역까지 확장되어 있는 가장 확장된 시민 개념을 가지고 있습니다. 그러니까 시민이라고 하면은 물질적으로 독립돼 있어야 되고 자기 스스로 결정할 수 있어야 되고 뭐 그런 거죠. 그래서 그런 개념을 이제 비집의 자유 또는 물질적 생존이라는 걸 이렇게 제시를 하고 있는데 뭐 이건 저도 찬성하는 거지만 제 의문은요. 그렇다 그러면은 물질적인 독립성과 기본소득 사이에 개념적 내적 연관이 있어야 됩니다. A는 B고 B는 A다라는 관계. 단순히 A면 B다가 아니라 B면 A다의 관계가 있어야 되는 겁니다. 근데 그런 논리적인 필연성이 도대체 있는가 없는가 이 문제를 좀 따져봐야 된다라는 겁니다. 질문을 저는 던집니다. 소위 물질적인 독립성이라든지 생존이라든지 또는 비집의 자유를 보장해 줄 수 있는 다른 사회체계는 불가능한가? 현실적으로 가능했던 사회체제는 없죠. 그런데 이 사고 모델로서는 가능합니다. 예를 들어 물질적인 독립성이라는 게 뭐 루소가 생각했던 재산 소유 민주주의 계속 어떤 뭐 소유권의 상한을 정하고 계속 국가가 이 가난한 사람을 위해서 재분배하고 뭐 요즘 식으로 얘기하는 사회적 기본급여 같은 거 하는 거죠. 뭐 그렇게 하면 되는 거 아닙니까? 근데 사실 그런 결국 이제 리버럴 소셜리즘까지 가는 프로퍼티 오닝 디모크라시, 그러니까 재산 소유 민주주의 안에서 두 가지 경향이 있는데 하나는 루스처럼 그렇게 생각하는 경향이고 하나는 페인처럼 그게 아니다 그냥 다 걷어가지고 n분의 1로 가끔씩 나눠주자 그리고 늙으면 완전히 다 매일 나눠주자 이렇게 기본소득 또는 공유부 배당의 개념이 들어있는 이 재산 소유 민주주의 유형도 있다는 겁니다. 이게 현대 와서 그대로 되풀이됩니다. 한쪽에는 미드 같은 형이 있는 거고요. 그러니까 50%의 주식은 전부 국가가 갖고 그것을 배당한다는 미드 같은 유형이 있고 한쪽에는 롤스 같은 형이 있죠. 이게 계속 나타나는 거다. 그러면은 물질적인 독립성이라든지 비집의 자유를 보장해주는 생각 가능한, 상상 가능한 이론적인 사회 형태가 꼭 페인이나 미드여야 된다는 보장은 없는 거 아닙니까? 루소나 롤스가 비집의 자유를 보장해주지 않는가? 만약 그렇게 했을 때, 그럼 공화주의와 리버럴 소셜리즘 또는 뭐 프로그레시브 리버럴이 만날 수 있는 부분들이 이제 거기서 생기는 건데, 그런 게 제 의문이고요. 그래서 공화주의 기본소득론을 완성하려고 하려면 공유론적 공화주의 또는 공유부 배당론에 입각한 공화주의가 필요하다는 겁니다. 이것은 왜 반드시 확장된 시민 개념과 공유자 개념, 원천적인 공유자 개념과 확장된 시민 개념이 만나야 된다는 겁니다. 그래야만 이 정당성, 규범적 정당성의 기초가 확립이 된다는 얘기입니다. 그리고 그냥 단순히 시민됨, 시티즌리에 대한 논쟁 그리고 시민 개념의 확장으로만 풀어갈 게 아니라 공화주의 기본소득론이 적극적으로 나름대로의 분배 정의론을 전개해야 된다라고 생각을 합니다. 물론 제가 여기서 이 글에서 제시한 분배 정의론과 다른 식으로 전개할 수도 있을 겁니다. 그러나 제가 생각할 때는 공유부 분배 정의론이 훨씬 더 타당하지 않느냐라는 거고요. 그래서 좀 설명을 드리자면 토지, 생태환경, 지식, 네트워크 이런 거는 누구의 것도 아니다. 협동의 산물이다. 그러니까 뭐 일부 학자들은 이건 뭐 커먼 헤리티지다 이렇게 설명하잖아요. 그러니까 이거는 사유재산권을 가지고 있다고 해서 사적으로 전유해야 되는 게 아니라 뭐 소유 형태와 무관하게 그걸 공동 소유로 하건 또는 조세로 받건 소유 형태와 무관하게 모두에게 n분의 1로 돌려줘야 된다라는 이야기를 할 수 있다는 겁니다. 일종의 이제 소박한 분배 정의론인데 뭐 판파레이스의 분배 정의론처럼 뭐 복잡한 이론적 기초를 갖고 있는 게 아니라 인간 역사에 나타난 분배 정의론 중에 가장 오래된 분배 정의론, 성과에 따른 분배. 네 성과면 네가 가져가라. 이 성과에 따른 분배를 제대로 하기 위해서라도 네 성과가 아니고 공동의 성과인 것은 전부 다 공동이 공유해야 된다. n분의 1로 배당해야 된다라는 주장을 우리는 할 수 있는 거 아니냐라는 이야기를 했습니다. 다시 정리를 하자면 핵심은 시민권을 물질적인 영역, 경제적인 영역, 사회적인 영역까지 확장하는 공화주의적인 정치가 굉장히 기본소득에 대해서 중요한 어떤 토대를 제공한다라는 겁니다. 그러나 그렇게 확장할 때 공화주의가 만나는 사회체제, 사회경제체제가 반드시 기본소득을 배당하는 사회인 것은 아니다라는 거예요. 기본소득을 배당하는 사회까지 포함한 큰 의미에서의 이 재산 소유 민주주의를 만나게 되는 거고, 그게 기본소득을 배당하는 사회와 공화주의 정치철학이 만나게 하려면 우리는 공유부 배당에 관한 일종의 분배 정의론을 공화주의 정치철학과 만나게 해야 된다라고 생각합니다. 그래서 제 식으로 얘기를 하자면 이 공유 배당에 대한 분배 정의 논증이 공화주의 기본소득에 반드시 보충돼야 되는 것이다라는 겁니다. 간단히 마치겠습니다.